Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Kaufman. Welcome to our 63rd installment of the Torah portion of the week. We're holding by Parshas Miketz, and the Parsha speaks about Yosef being in charge of Egypt, the brothers coming down, and Yosef speaking harsh to them, and holding Shimon prisoner, and then making Binyamin come down. So it's a very hard Parsha to understand, the fact that what Yosef does to the brothers. But there's an interesting verse here in chapter 42, verse 28. Right here, the Torah says, actually start from verse 27. When one of them opened a sack to give feed to his donkey at the inn, he saw his money, and behold, it was the mouth of his sack. And he said to his brothers, "My money's been returned. Behold, it is in my sack." Their hearts sank. They turned trembling one to another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" So, when they're on the way back to the land of Israel, they stop at the inn. We see from here clear that their money is given back to them. So, the verse over here says that they were extremely afraid. Right? Why is this being done? So it says, Moav Rebbe Rav Agon Ramoshe Stur Moch Shlita. He brings down in his sefer, in his book Chochmah V'das, and he brings down a medrash. And the medrash brings down a medrash. It's also a Jerusalem Talmud as well. And he brings down like this. He says, Rabbi Simon Bar Zvida died. He died very young, and he died very suddenly. And the medrash continues and says that just like the Shvatim, the tribes, they found a Mitzvah. What did they find? They found this money in their sack. Right? Their money was given back to them. But it says over here, even though the money's given back, they're afraid. They're tremendously afraid. So by getting the money back, they're afraid. We that lost Rabbi Simon, who died at a young age, and he died suddenly, all the more so we should be afraid. Right? So the brothers understood that what occurred, isn't in the norm. Right? It's not normal that they should find money in their sacks, right, after they paid and after they leave. Right? That shouldn't happen. And according to the Medrash, when someone dies young, especially in this case, that all the more so we should be afraid. So Marebi brings down that this is a tremendous thing. The tribes themselves, you have to keep in mind that regardless of what they did to Yosef, right, even though they put him in the pit, they made him suffer and caused tremendous anguish to his father. Nonetheless, they judged him. They felt this is what he deserved. Seems according to heaven, that's what was supposed to happen. But seemingly they get punished. Why do they get punished? Or in this case, what Yosef does is because they went beyond what they should have done. All right? They acted in a way that was, that was too cruel. In what they did. But here it's interesting that the Rebbe says that the tribes, they had good fortune, right? Even though they paid, for the food and everything else, they got all their money back. So that seemingly is a good thing, right? Even so, they were afraid. They shuddered, as the Torah says, because this isn't common. Right? So if it's not common, and God's going out of his way to show them something, i.e. that this is against nature, nonetheless, God is trying to give them a message. And that is that even though a person got something good, he got something special from God himself, he should really be afraid because God doesn't do things for nothing. If we have a good fortune, we shouldn't just say, wow, it's my lucky day. Look at the goodness that God has given me. And a person should be whistling Dixie. Say, wow, what a great thing. What a tremendous thing. It could be that, God doesn't do anything for nothing. And in actuality, it was a test. Right? The test was that if God gives them their money back, then how are they going to act with the money? How are they going to give praise to God? All the more so if something bad happens, right? That's probably easier to understand. If something bad happens, God forbid, immediately a person has to worry and say, what does God want from me? If it's by something good and we should be worried, maybe I'm getting my merit in this world, maybe a person's not going to have a merit in the next world, or whatever the case is. So, a person should be worried. If something bad happens, all the more so, a person should be worried. The Rebbe here says that the ways of God are tremendously hidden. Right? Once the temple was destroyed, God is very, very hidden in this world. It's an impossibility to understand and to fathom why God does what he does. Right? The famous question, why bad things happen to good people, why seemingly evil people have it easy, right? It's an age-old question. But God's ways are tremendously hidden. And it's impossible for a human to understand, right? We can't fathom why God does what he does. Now, the brothers treated Yosef in an inhumane way. They heard him scream, they didn't care. They said, oh, he's such a tzaddik, if he's so righteous, and nothing bad's supposed to happen to him, we'll put him in this pit. They put him in a pit. It says a bor she'ein bo mayim, a pit without any water. But the Talmud explains, means it didn't have water, but it had snakes and scorpions. So they said, okay, if he's really righteous, nothing will happen to him. And that's what happened. Right? Snakes, scorpions go to one side, and he doesn't die. So that alone should have made the brothers think. Right? But they acted in a cruel way. Now the fact that each brother gets their money back, they understood it's not a simple matter. But God is demanding something from them. And they say, how could it be? What does God want from us? Same thing when Rabbi Simon bar Zvida, Rabbi Simon, son of Zvida, dies suddenly. Right? And he died very young. So the people there didn't understand. They didn't understand, somebody like that, at that level, why did he die young? But the answer is, the ways of God are hidden. We can't understand why he does what he does. So the tribes themselves try to understand, what's going on. Why is their money being returned? So this is a tremendous thing. Spoken about a number of times, I think in different ways. But, there's an idea that when anything happens to us, for good or for bad, the question is, what are we going to do? So we'll take the easy case first. If it's bad, something negative happens, right? A person loses something, they get sick, property gets damaged, whatever something, whenever something bad happens, and it's going to cost the person money, either to fix it, replace it, or whatever the case is. So a person understands, right? A person understands this is negative. So it's not so hard to fathom that when something happens that's negative, what should we do? We should look into our actions. We should try and become better people. Now, how do we know? How do we know what to do? Some things may be more obvious, some things less. Right? Probably most things aren't as obvious because things could happen. Something could have happened, months ago, years ago, and now he's only getting paid back now. Because if it was something that happened direct, we wouldn't have free will. So, it's very hard to figure out, why something might happen. But the idea is that when something negative happens, we have to think, what did I do? What possibly could I have done? Right? So it could be, infinite amount of scenarios. So instead of like racking our brains, we just understand, God's sending me a message. And the message is He wants me to become better. Now, what do I have to work on? So I would say try and work, on a lot of things, in a very small way. We're not gonna figure out why these things happen per se. Some things are, maybe more obvious. In the case of the brothers, in the case of the brothers, they realize what they did. This is the cause. So this is a little more obvious. Even talking about righteous people, and they do something, this righteous person does something, and he's taking a task for it. There's the punishment is measure for measure. But if someone doesn't sin all that often, then it probably won't be that hard to figure it out. For most of us, that's not the case. But in any case, we have to have a higher awareness. This is what God wants. Put us in a situation, and if we fail, and we have to pay a price for, whatever we've done, nonetheless, we have to think. We have to think about what we do. Our actions matter. Now let's take the other side. The other side might be a little bit harder to understand. Why? Because if a person does something positive, or let's say there's a positive result. Let's say they inherited money. Let's say, I don't know, they get a higher position, where they work, or whatever the case is. So remember here says, you got to think about that also, because things don't come for nothing. They don't come for free. So if God gives you bounty, and He helps you out, and you're doing much better, we have to think. A person can't rely on that. It could be taken away. Anything can happen. At the same time, a person has to realize that whatever goodness comes, maybe it's coming for something else. Maybe it's coming to offset something else. If we go back to Yaakov, when Yaakov confronts Esau, and even before that, he tells God twice that you should be with me and you should guard me. And God says, yeah, I'll take care of it. So after the first time, Yaakov says it again. Right? He says it later as well. So the commentators ask, why does he ask a second time? First time I can understand. First time he's afraid. He wants God to be with him. He wants God to take care of him. That I can hear. And if God says, don't worry about it, I'll do it, then what's he worried about? Why does he have to ask him a second time? So the reason he has to ask him a second time, some of the commentaries say, is maybe he's going to do something in between that he's not going to have the merit. He's not going to have the merit to protect him. And God won't protect him. So he wants to make sure, because who knows what he might do. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Talking about a tremendously righteous person here. But he says, maybe I'll do something wrong. And then the shield, the spiritual shield around me, it's going to have a few chinks in the armor. And when it has a few chinks in the armor, maybe I'll be vulnerable. So he asks again. Now, some people say maybe it's a lack of faith. Maybe he should have just believed that God's going to take care of him and that's it. Could be. Right? At Yaakov's level, maybe. Right? But the Talmud says clear that that's what he's worried about. So if something good, happens, or let's say a string of good events, so should a person automatically think that he's getting his entire merit in this world? He's not going to have anything in the next world? We're not given that much time to think in this world anyway, so, when things happen, we take it for what it is. A person puts tremendous effort in, person gets the raise, gets the job, or, something else good that happens. Bottom line is, my Rebbe here points out, don't rest on your laurels. The reason you don't rest on your laurels is because you don't know. It's not clear why these things are. It could be God wants to give you a gift. It's payback for other things that a person might have suffered with. But it also could be, and my Rebbe brings this up a number of times, is we have to be careful that, a person has goodness and has bounty and has plenty. How does that person know for sure it's not because he's forfeiting his portion of the world to come? Right? How do we know? Maybe he's getting all the merits that he should get in the next world. God's giving it to him in this world and giving him the merit for whatever he did. And in the next world, nothing's going to happen. Right? He'll die like a dog. He'll go poof. When he dies, nothing. So the question is, can we really rely on ourselves? Can we say when good things happen, that, God's not testing me? Now, I deserve it, whatever, however we want to justify whatever good thing it is. But it's a test as well. If the money came in and they didn't lose anything, then it's a test of what they're going to do with the money. It's a test, how are they going to thank God? What praise are they going to give? What thanks are they going to give? How much of it? So God doesn't do anything for nothing. So that's why we always have to be on the lookout. We always have to question, why it is. You can't just live life and say, wow, got a break here, that's great. I got the raise that I wanted, I got what I wanted. But who's to say that's necessarily a good thing? So when we pray every day, except on Shabbos or a festival, when we say the Shemona Esrei, silent meditation, one of the things we ask for is livelihood. Right? We ask it in terms of agriculture and that our crops should be blessed. But, having abundance of livelihood is not necessarily a blessing. People say, yeah, if I had plenty, I would not use the money. I take care of other people. I would help, I would help out other people. This, that, and the other thing. Yeah, that may be true. But it also might be a tremendous test. You might fail. And most people who have money probably fail in many ways. Because as the Torah says, in the book of Deuteronomy, God says that, at some point in history, the Jewish people are going to eat off the fat of the land. They're going to have money. They're going to have wealth. The question is how they use it. And the Torah there says that if you're given this great bounty, don't forget about me. God says don't forget about me. So if a person has plenty, he doesn't worry about where his next meal is coming from, how he's going to marry for his kids, and all that. He's got plenty. How in the world is he going to forget about God? Right? Doesn't he realize God's the one who gave it to him? God's the one that helped him? Or is the person going to say, I am the self-made man. I did everything. I pulled myself out of the womb. All right? That's a little bit of an exaggeration. Nonetheless, a person could be conceited. Could think he's God's gift to the world because he has money. With money brings power. Also brings a fat head as well. And most people that have money, a lot of them are not so nice. Not nice in business, not nice to their family. They certainly don't want to part with it. They don't want to help out others. They'll say, I worked hard for it, let them work hard for it. Why should I help out others? At the end of the day, if a person's given a bounty, he's got to help others with it. Because God doesn't give it for no reason. It's a test. It's an absolute test. See what he's going to do. And how thankful he's going to be. Or is he going to say, I am the self-made man. So when we look at life, and people go through tremendous ups and downs, no question. When a person's down, they can understand. it's not good. Sometimes God has to knock someone down in order to build them up. So that's easy. That's not so hard to understand. If things are going good, I've heard this brought down by a number of people, and that is, if things are going good, you should still pray like God, you deserve nothing. Like God should give you nothing. Like you have nothing. Don't ever take anything for granted, because in a split second it can be taken away. So you still want to have the same merits. And if a person didn't have anything and he doesn't know where his next meal's coming from, you should pray with the same amount of fervor as you would if you had $1 million in the bank. But we all know that a person doesn't pray in those two situations. They're very different. A person can sit back and relax, doesn't have to work so hard. Right? He knows he's got this money, it's invested in the bank, whatever. So it's very easy to believe in God. Very easy to be a strong believer. If a person's struggling, on a daily basis, you don't take anything for granted. Because the fact that you survive is an absolute miracle. If you're going from Peter, to Paul and, to Joe, pay one back to pay the other back just to, keep yourself afloat, which some people do. It's an unfortunate thing, but there's a reality, because they just don't make enough money. So they don't take things for granted. The fact that they have things and they're able to survive, maybe not fully intact mentally, but they get beaten down, but they still somehow able to survive. So they don't take things for granted. The reason is because they can't. There's nothing to take for granted, because they're constantly struggling. Or whether it's a sickness. A person's ill. Can't take that for granted, because you're ill. Can't move around so much, can't get out of bed so much. Your head hurts, your body hurts. It's hard to function. So we take things for granted only when we don't have them. That's a terrible thing. Because the reality is, the fact that a person's alive day in and day out, he's got a roof over his head, not sleeping in the street, has food, they're not starving, maybe not eating the way they want to, because of lack of funds or whatever, but they're not starving. Isn't that what to be thankful for? So a person might complain. And a person might say, yeah, I wish I had it better. But see, God could always make it worse, if He wanted to. He's giving you an opportunity to recognize what you have. To be thankful for what you have. Because you only realize what you don't have when you don't have it. Famous story with the students of the Vilna Gaon. Rav Elijah Vilna, students were very, very poor, suffered tremendously. And he would send them to the hospital before Shabbos, go visit people in the hospital. And the people realized, the students realized, they came out of the hospital, they went into Shabbos in a totally different way. They didn't have much food. They were extremely poor, but they were healthy. The body didn't hurt. They could get around. They're not sick. That's a huge thing. So sometimes when a person does a mitzvah, Bikur Cholim, and visiting someone who's sick, how much do we take to heart? Thank God I'm not that way. Thank God, present time, God's taking care of me. I have health. It's not something we should take for granted, because things can turn over in one day, 1 second. Things can change. So yeah, we have to appreciate, what's out there and what we have, regardless of how difficult the situation is. And we don't. We complain. We're always complaining about something. I don't have enough of this. The weather's bad. Look at all these difficult things. I was speaking to someone earlier, about just the advancement of technology, over a small amount of time. Most people today in their phone, has more memory than the first computers. And not only that, the first computers were like, took up rooms of space. Things are a lot easier today than it ever was. Producing things, saving things, making videos. It's a lot easier than it used to be. Did we ever stop to think, what a great thing God's done for us? Or, when things go wrong and our computer shuts down and makes a mess of stuff that we've done, or we've made the mess ourselves, do we ever stop and think how much easier our lives are with it? You go back, 70, 80 years, even, or, more than that. You have to go back more than that, 100, 150 years. There's no washing machines. Imagine, women to go wash clothes, go to the river, scrub, bring them home. No dryers, got to hang the stuff up to dry. Life was a lot more difficult. But I think people were happier in many ways. That the world itself was a hard world to live in. There was war, there was communism, socialism, people running for their lives. I'm not going to take that for granted. That is, I can't imagine living in such a world. So we have it relatively easy, in most places, right? We're not at war. There's abundance of food. People aren't starving. It might be difficult, livelihood, and other things, but it's not like that world. Everything was hard. I think people were much more simple, though, and lived much more simply. So some people will say, well, because they had to. They had no choice. If they could have lived a higher life, they would have. So that may be true. That in essence may be true. But people used their brains back then also. They didn't waste their time. Movies, videos, video games, whatever, just like Pac-Man chomping at your brain. Chomp, 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 chomp. Most people today are brain dead. They don't think. They don't think very much. They just go from one thing to the next. So technology, fills a tremendous void. That is for sure. But when we think about it, even though our lives are made easier, right, let's ask, is it better? Do I have meaning in life? I get all these gadgets that save a tremendous amount of time. Tremendous amount of time when they work. I won't say they do work, they don't work, problems, this, that. We're talking about a normal case. Things work. Saves me a tremendous amount of time. Made my life so much easier. But am I happier? Am I fulfilled? So most people with all their things and all their gadgets, see what happens when something goes wrong. If it doesn't go according to clockwork, what happens? They go to pieces. They'll curse. They'll, curse the machine. They'll curse the people that made the machine. Curse the company. They'll go out of their minds till it gets fixed. So technology can be a blessing and a curse. Yes, it makes our lives easier. Meaning it doesn't give. So someone will say, well, you think it's better to go back, to the medieval ages? When things were much more difficult? I'm not advocating that. I say you're too spoiled, you're too this. Yeah, it could be. Right? We don't want to go back to a more difficult life. So what we have to do is take what we have and sanctify it and use it for its right purpose. Right? So we have this technology, use it for good. Again, double-edged sword. It's definitely a double-edged sword. You can use it for good, but, it can also get used for bad as well. So everything that we're given that comes our way, for good or for bad, is a test. So getting their money back in a way that wasn't the norm, Right? A person makes a business deal, goes on his way, doesn't expect to find his money back in his possession. Definitely not expected and not common. Made the brothers think. It made them really think, like, what's going on here? Have to look into our actions. Why is this happening? Rebbe continues and he says, and this is what the intention is when a person goes to a mourner's house. What do they say to the mourner before they leave? They say to the mourner, Amakom yenachem eschem betoch shar avelit Zion v'Yerushalayim. Hamakom is God, right? It's called the place. Really, the place is the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. But God is also is referred to as Hamakom, the place. And he says you should be comforted amongst the mourners of Jerusalem. So he says the intention is that there are plenty of things we can't understand, that are beyond our grasp. Why is it, amongst 2,000 years, we're in exile, generation after generation, and there have been murders, there have been pogroms, righteous people have been killed, even little children, right? Boggles the mind. We look at our history, the Jewish people have been butchered. Great people, not so great people, women, children. It absolutely boggles the mind. So he says, as we mentioned before, it's impossible for a human to understand the thoughts of God. Now, I've heard people say, I understand this and it must be like this. I mean, God works in mysterious ways. We don't fathom him. A person reads the book Derech Hashem, The Way of God, by the Ramchal, by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. The Ramchal says of how divine providence works, and how God puts everything in action. There are physical things that have spiritual entities. The planets, trees, rocks. These things have spirit. They are spiritual entities even though they're in a physical form. And then you have angels that are guarding different things, taking care of different things, putting all this stuff into action as God's messengers. Again, that doesn't mean they have their own free will. God's controlling them. They can't go outside their own spiritual DNA unless God wants them to. So, why do I mention this? I mention it because there's a whole world that we don't even see. It's brought down to the Medrash, I think in the Zohar as well, that when a tree is cut down, right, anytime a tree is cut, the tree screams out of pain. But see, we don't have the ears to listen. We're not tuned in. Because if we did hear the scream of this tree, we wouldn't have any paper. We wouldn't be cutting down any trees. So the only point is, without going into detail, is that there's a lot going on in the physical world with all these spiritual entities going around taking care of things or putting things into motion that we don't see, we don't fathom, we have no idea. The person will say, I think this and that. You have no idea. And then there have to be repercussions for actions. Torah states clear, you keep the Torah fine. If not, there's going to be payback. They're going to be, there's reward and punishment. There are consequences. But keep in mind, when a person does something, there are a million things that can happen with what he did. Not only does it affect him, it could affect his family, it could affect others, and, spiritually speaking, could, affect it. Affect him as well in different ways. And others, it's like going through the matrix. You have all these things going on at once. God's putting everything together with everything. Not just one person. Right? I'm just talking about one person. Per se. If you take take a whole country. Forget a whole country. Take a whole neighborhood. Whole neighborhood of people. And all the actions that they do and what the ramifications are. You put it in the computer explodes. And the fact that God keeps everything together and how we run things, that boggles the mind. But the Ramchal says, this is how God set it up. And he's got these messengers. They do his bidding. He tells them what to do. One can be superseded for the other. Bottom line, what we see, we don't see. Right? Nobody should think and be so conceited to say, stuff just happens. God put nature on autopilot. Let's say, for argument's sake, that's true. Even if he did that, imagine all the repercussions of all the actions, of everything that's done by everybody. For all future generations, there's going to be reward and punishment and consequences. So God said, okay, I'm going to put everything, what I'm going to call nature, and I'm going to make sure everything goes according to plan, the way it should, and multiply that infinity. To get all these different things going different directions. God's okay, I'm going to put on autopilot, I'm out of here. I could have done that in theory. But as we see, it's a very complicated thing. One individual is complicated. Not to mention 10 or 50 or 100. One example. Imagine a person intermarries, right? A Jew marries a non-Jew. Not allowed to according to the Torah. Mentioned it many times. Totally forbidden. Now, if a soul, everybody has a soul, and when a person marries someone, it's like two halves of a soul coming together. So what happens if you marry the wrong person? Right? The non-Jew doesn't want to convert, not interested in conversion. We'll make it easy. So your half a soul still has that half a soul, even if it's with a non-Jew. It's not the right person. Right? Not for argument's sake, we're believing that the Torah is true, and God told Moshe what to write down, and this is what the Torah says. Right? I'm not making this up. This is what the Torah says. So if that's true, then you just messed up generations. Because you're not going to have the right children you should have had. So based on that, God has to make all kinds of other calculations. Now, what about your soulmate? Right? Your soulmate just went out the window. A non-Jew is not a soulmate for a Jew. Unless the non-Jew converts and it's a proper conversion. But if it's not, and they don't convert, so the repercussions are unbelievable. There are generations and generations of kids not being born. Wiped off the face of the map. Because the person married the wrong person. I'm not talking about, again, I'm making it very easy. I'm not talking about where someone's married. Let's say a Jew married to a Jew. And something goes awry. Maybe it is a soulmate. It's not their soulmate. A person can have their soulmate and still get messed up. Still get divorced. It can happen. We're talking about a case where someone marries someone they're not supposed to be married to. Right? In this case, a Jew and a non-Jew. So now that other soulmate is going to have to marry someone else. Right? So there are a lot of things going on. I'm just mentioning one person. One person made a mistake. And look at what is affected from that. It's a snowball effect. You need to make a family tree. These are the kids he has. Or if he marries a non-Jewish woman, they're not his kids. Technically. Biologically, yes. Spiritually, no. So, you make this tree and it's all messed up. So if there's 70-80% intermarriage amongst the Jewish people, imagine all the fixing up and all the calculations God himself has to do. You need an omnipresent being to do that. Because we're not able to do that. The calculation just goes off the roof, goes off the charts, and we don't know how to make the calculation either. What the repercussions are going to be for all those future generations. What happens to the other half of that soul? Right, the spouse they were supposed to marry. Now what happens to them? Who does she marry? Or he marry? What kids do they have? Or don't? I mean, it's a whole chain of events that gets messed up. So God has to keep all this in mind and keep it all together. So how in the world could anybody say, I fathom what's going on? It's an impossibility. Someone will say, we mentioned God's ways are hidden. So why are children sick? Why do people die young? Right? It's an age-old question. We don't know. A partial answer, and I say partial because it's not a full answer, but the only way we can possibly understand it is if we have a soul. If we have a soul, and it gets judged after it dies, and it doesn't have the merit to have its final resting place, it could have to come back to this world. That we call in the vernacular reincarnation. And I'm going to tell you a big fundamental principle. It's a Jewish concept. It's a good thing you were sitting down watching this. Otherwise, you probably would have fainted. Most people say, really? It's a Jewish concept? Yeah, it's a Jewish concept. We don't want to come back to this world, but most people are reincarnated souls. So if we see something happen to somebody, and a person, let's say, comes, a child that is sick, someone dies young, whatever the case is, the only possible way to have any understanding at all, and again, I'm not even saying it's half the explanation, but I'm saying the only way a person can understand it, or maybe not have an explanation, it's not, it is comforting up to a point. And that is that there had to be payback for that soul. Why? Because if a soul comes to this world in a handicapped person, handicapped child, let's say someone's autistic, for instance. So basically you have a messed up body. You have a soul with a messed up body. So you'll say, why in the world does that happen? You'll say, well, stuff happens. Well, we don't believe stuff happens. We believe everything is methodical. God knows exactly what he's doing. We're not privy to why things happen, per se, but, for argument's sake, God knows what he's doing. If he knows what he's doing, then the only thing we can say is that soul had to be put in that body because God had to pay it back for what it did in this world. And God's putting it back in this world in order to fix that up. So, not going into reincarnation too much, I just want to point out there are a lot of things that go on that we can't fathom. If we believed in Zoroastrianism, we would say it's a good God, it's a bad God. So, okay, if we believed in, Greek mythology, you have gods fighting all over the place. Okay, it's chaos. So someone who's a real atheist will say nothing happens for any reason. Just stuff happens. Wrong place, wrong time. That's it. But if you believe in a higher being, and we believe the Torah is true, right, then we have to somewhat come up with an explanation. The real explanation is we don't know. Right, that is the real explanation. We have no idea. God runs the world how he sees fit. I'm just pointing out that with this idea of reincarnation, it is comforting. It is comforting. It's not a full answer, though. Because you ask someone who has a handicapped child, right? And they can't do anything on their own, and they'll never be able to function. You say, listen, it's a higher soul, had to come back to this world. You can explain it, in a way that they can understand it intellectually. It still hurts. It's still inside. I'll give one other example that that I know the person has happened to. A friend of ours has a daughter. Daughter was expecting, and the child died. He had to give birth at 6 months. Child died. The soul of that child came back to the mother in a dream and said, "Don't worry. I didn't have to be born. I didn't have to live for 1 second in this world. I had to be carried for a certain amount of time. You're the ones who were supposed to do it, etc. And I got fixed up what I needed to do, and you shouldn't worry about it. So you might say, well, that's a very nice dream. Who's to say the dream is true? Well, first of all, I know the person. They're not a quack. Certainly not a wacko by any stretch. But that is somewhat comforting. Does this person wish that she could have the child back? And it was a normal child and it lived? Of course. Is it painful? Go through a pregnancy, 6 months, 7 months, whatever it is, and have this child and the child dies, or give birth to a stillborn? It's horrific. No one's saying it's not horrific. But if a person had a dream like that, or they saw something clear like that there's much more going on beyond what we see, that is somewhat comforting. Because otherwise, there is no other explanation. It's just not, person misses the person that's there, or whatever happened to them. So that's hard, 100%. I'm not saying it's not hard. But it does give a glimpse, a small glimpse, what goes on in the world. Anyone interested, I made a webinar on reincarnation. You can find it on my blog at orthodoxconversion.com. And I went through in good detail, how a person could come back in this world, what they might have done to deserve to come back, other things. So take a look, over there. But the bottom line is we don't, there are plenty of things we see in this world we don't know, and God's ways are hidden. So we can't think we know, we understand. So that's what we say to people that mourn, that you should be consoled amongst the mourners of Jerusalem, because that is the will of God, what happened. Oh, that's a hard one. Because the reality is, when someone dies, you have an obligation to mourn for. Right? Mother, father, sister, brother, spouse, God forbid a child. Right? Someone you have an obligation to mourn for before they're buried. What's the blessing you have to make? Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, the true judge. Very hard blessing to make. The reason you have to make that blessing, and then you rip the outer part of your shirt, if you can see, right? The outer part of your shirt here, and you rip down, because it's a sign of mourning. It's a hard blessing to make. Why? Because when your loved one is lying there dead in front of you, you have to acknowledge that God is the one who did it. And it's not good God, bad God. There's only one. But part of the mourning process is admitting He is the true judge. It's a very hard thing to do. So when we comfort somebody by being at the mourner's house, and they should be comforted amongst the mourners of Jerusalem, we're saying that, God should comfort you. He's the one who did it. So we don't know why. We don't know, how long a person's here in this world. Some more, some less. But at the end of the day, we acknowledge, and this is the point, is that we acknowledge that God is the one showing us things. If a person suffers, God wants you to suffer. You got to think about what you've done. Think about your actions. If He's giving you something good, don't rest on your laurels. Because that's not what God wants. Right? He wants you to live life to the fullest. He wants you to reach your potential. But He also wants you to know that His ways are totally hidden, not something we can fathom. I want to mention also, I give a class in Derech Hashem, the way of God. Speaks about prophecy, divine providence, angels, reincarnation. That class is every Tuesday night, 9 o'clock at night, New York time. I also give conversion classes, Noahide classes. Take a look at my Facebook fan page, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, or Beyond Noahide. And as I mentioned, you can take a look at my my blog at orthodoxconversion.com. And anyone who wants to contact me, can contact me at rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com. And every Wednesday night, I also do a live video for Tanakh Talk, TENAKTALK.com, on controversial issues. Wishing everyone a great Shabbos.